Here's a chilling Halloween horror story based on a real incident, set in the eerie atmosphere of small town. It was Halloween night in 1968, when a group of teens from the quiet town of Willow Creek decided to visit the abandoned St. Mark's Orphanage, a place steeped in local legend. The orphanage had been closed down years ago after a tragic fire took the lives of several children and a caretaker. Rumors spread about the ghost of Miss Agnes, the strict headmistress, who was believed to still roam the halls, searching for the children she lost in the flames. Tim, Sarah, Mike, and Jenny gathered their courage, armed with flashlights and bravado, and entered the decrepit building. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and the musty smell of abandonment filled the air. Broken windows allowed the October wind to whistle through the halls, creating an eerie hum that seemed to follow their every step. As they moved deeper into the orphanage, strange things began to happen. Sarah swore she heard the faint sound of children laughing, though no one else seemed to notice. Tim, leading the group, felt a cold hand brush against his arm, but when he turned, no one was there. They reached the dormitory, where the fire had started all those years ago. The walls were blackened with soot, and old, charred beds lay scattered across the room. Suddenly, Mike's flashlight flickered and died, leaving them in near-total darkness. That's when they heard it, a soft, shuffling sound, like the dragging of feet. "Is someone there?" Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. No response. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a faint glow appeared at the far end of the room. The teens froze in place as a figure slowly emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned black gown, her face pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes staring right at them. The figure floated closer, her presence growing colder with each step. "Where are my children?" the ghostly woman asked in a voice barely louder than a whisper. Terrified, the group backed away, but the door slammed shut behind them, locking them inside. The spirit of Miss Agnes loomed over them, her eyes fixed on Tim, who was now standing where the headmistress' office used to be. Suddenly, the sound of crying children echoed throughout the room, growing louder and more desperate. In a panic, Sarah screamed, and the apparition vanished, but the cries persisted, filling the air with sorrow and pain. The group rushed to the door, finally breaking free, running out into the cold night air. The town of Willow Creek still talks about that night. After the incident, the orphanage was demolished, but those who visit the site claim to hear the faint echoes of crying children and the distant voice of Miss Agnes calling for her lost ones. The teens, now grown, still carry the memory of that haunting Halloween night, swearing they'll never speak of it again. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, you can hear her voice asking the same chilling question: "Where are my children?" Story number 2, The Haunted Mirror. It was a chilly Halloween night when Sarah found an old antique shop on the edge of town. The store, dusty and forgotten, seemed like the perfect place to find something unique for her Halloween party. She browsed the shelves of odd trinkets, old books, and peculiar furniture when something caught her eye. A large, ornate mirror, its frame carved with intricate designs, and its glass slightly fogged with age. The shopkeeper noticed her interest. "You don't want that," he said with a grave tone. "There's a dark history to it. That mirror belonged to the Hargrave family, and legend says it's cursed." Sarah, amused by his warning, insisted. She loved ghost stories and thought the mirror would add an eerie touch to her Halloween decor. After some hesitation, the shopkeeper reluctantly sold it to her. That night, Sarah hung the mirror in her hallway. It was perfect, creepy, yet elegant. As she prepared for the party, she felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching her. She glanced at the mirror, but her reflection was the only thing staring back. The guests arrived, and the night was full of laughter and Halloween pranks. But as the evening wore on, strange things began to happen. One of her friends, David, stood by the mirror, and as he looked into it, his face went pale. "Who's standing behind me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Everyone turned, but no one was there. Sarah laughed it off, thinking it was a trick of the light. But then, others began to notice odd reflections in the mirror, shadowy figures lurking behind them, fleeting movements that weren't happening in the room. One by one, guests started to feel uncomfortable. The mirror seemed to grow darker, its surface warping as though something on the other side was pressing against it. Sarah finally approached the mirror herself, and for a moment, her reflection smiled, but it wasn't her smile. Panic set in, and guests quickly left the house, spooked by the haunted mirror. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The house felt cold, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. In the middle of the night, she heard a faint tapping sound coming from the hallway. Gathering her courage, she approached the mirror, her heart racing. The tapping grew louder, like fingernails scratching on glass. As she stood in front of it, her reflection appeared normal until it slowly began to grin. Though her own face remained still, the reflection lifted its hand and waved. Though Sarah's hand stayed at her sides, horrified, she grabbed a cloth and threw it over the mirror. But as she turned to leave, a voice whispered from behind her, "Don't cover me." The next morning, Sarah took the mirror back to the antique shop. But when she arrived, the store was empty, and the shopkeeper was gone. She left the mirror there, hoping to never see it again. From that day on, Sarah never bought another antique. But every Halloween, she swears she can hear faint scratching coming from the walls, like something trying to find its way back to her. A small but chilling story to remind you that some antiques carry more than just history.